All right. Here we are back again, World Religion class. Our segment, this segment, we're going on Islam, finishing up on Islam. Islam, and of course, all of our religions we teach from a Christian perspective. Islam frowns on claims of certainty of salvation, as in Christianity. Christianity offers assurance of salvation through faith and obedience to God and His Word. But Islam frowns on those claims of certainty. The attitude is seen as dictating God must do something. Islam believes God alone controls your destiny, your life, and your death. And they say all that happens is the will of Allah. Now in Islam, heaven and hell are depicted as places of physical pleasure or torment. Now, this is in Islam the decree of God. Number one, Allah, or God, is sovereign. Number two, all that Allah wills comes to pass. Number three, what Allah does not will does not happen. Number four, all that has happened must have been willed by Allah. So the result is apathy. Since everything that happens is decreed by God, there's no reason to try to change anything. You know, I talk about, I remember a story of when the U.S. had better relationships with Iraq and Iran, and some of our fighter pilots went over to teach the Islamic nations, Iraq and Iran, how to fly different planes. And the pilot was trying to instruct one of the Muslim pilots, but he would say every time the pilot made a mistake, the pilot would say, oh, that's not a mistake, it was the will of Allah. And the American pilot said, no, you made a mistake. You have to do this or do that, fly the plane this way, turn this way, do that. And every time the Muslim pilot would say, no, it was the will of Allah. And he could never teach him anything because he could never correct himself. He would never change. Everything that happened, he said, was the will of Allah. Well, that's in Islam the decree of God. All that happened must have happened because Allah willed it. And as a result, you'll never change because it's the will of Allah. Now, the 5 pillars. You must know the 5 pillars to be a good Muslim. The 5 pillars summarize Muslim worship. Number 1 is confession. Number 2 is prayers. Number 3, fasting. Number 4, almsgiving. Number 5, pilgrimage. Now, what are these things? Well, the 5 pillars. Confession, the confession is there is no God but Allah, or there's no God but God. You must make that confession. There's no God but Allah, or there's no God but God. Even in Christianity, we have a confession. Our confession as a Christian is Jesus is Lord. You must confess that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. And every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. In Islam, the confession is there's no God but God, or Muhammad. There's no God but God, and Muhammad speaks for him, all right? Or Muhammad is his spokesman. That's the confession. Number 2 in Islam of the 5 pillars, pillar number 2 is prayer. Prayer is ritual prayer, which takes place 5 times a day. In Islam, the Muslims pray 5 times a day. At sunrise, at noon, at mid-afternoon, which is about 3 p.m., at sunset, which is about 6 p.m., and 1 hour after sunset, which is about 7 p.m. All right? That is prayer time, 5 times a day. All right? And there is a call to prayer. There are towers on the buildings where they will actually call people to pray. Now, in the U.S., in our modern cities, they may have a loudspeaker in a Muslim community, and they'll call to prayer. All right? They have the public address systems. And in a modern mosque, and I've been to several mosques where you would go into the mosque, in the prayer room, there are a carpet with markers on the carpet to tell the worshipers where to stand and where to arrange themselves to pray. Also, on the wall is a niche in the wall, all right? And that niche in the wall is pointing the direction, lets you know where the east is located. And when you pray, you stand on your arranged spot and you pray toward the east. Why pray toward the east? Because that's where Mecca, the holy city, is located. All right? And usually when you go into the mosque, you must remove your shoes, rinse your feet in a water basin. Why? Cleanliness is essential because during the prayer time, you're required to put your forehead on the carpet several times. All right? And you can see this information in your book, page 95, page 96. So that's pillar number 2. Pillar number 5 in the 5 pillars of Islam is fastings. Muhammad received his first revelation during the month of Ramadan, which is around October, November of our calendar. The fast is during the daylight hours only. You may eat or drink before sunlight or after dark, but there is no food, drink, entertainment, sexual relationships. All are forbidden. And the first day after Ramadan is Eid al-Fitr. That's a special service in the mosque where the families decorate their homes and feast and exchange gifts. So that's fastings. And the entire month of fasting around November is called Ramadan, the month of fasting, only during the daylight period. All right? Then pillar number 4 is alms giving, which is the regular charitable givings or donations. In Sharia, or Islamic law, this giving is an annual gift to the poor. Now, in Christianity, our alms giving, we call it tithing. We tithe. All right? Or we give a tithe gift. We tithe. All right? Tithing is 10%. Tithe means tenth. But in Islam, it's 2.5% or 1/40th of your annual income is your alms giving. And then number 5 pillar in Islam is pilgrimage. Pilgrimage, where every Muslim must visit Mecca at least once in their lifetime. Mecca being the holy city. You must visit Mecca at least once in your lifetime, or the month of El Hajj, or pilgrimage. Now, Muhammad decreed all followers pray facing the east. All right? He actually said pray facing Jerusalem, but after his conflict with the Jews in Medina, he made Mecca the focal point of Islam. All right? And that's the center of Muslim devotion. That's their holy city. Now, Medina is also a holy city where Muhammad is buried, and Jerusalem is where it is said that Muhammad ascended to heaven one night. All right? Now, certain requirements in Islamic life. The Muslim life is focused on living up to requirements of righteousness, honesty, respect, and property and marital fidelity. These actions have 3 categories. Fard, which are obligations, such as the 5 pillars, obligatory actions. Haram, which are prohibited actions, such as idolatry. And then halal, which are permitted actions. Okay? Once again, the Islamic diet is also the counterpart to the Jewish kosher. There are permitted foods that you eat, some foods you do not eat. Pork or pork products, of course, are forbidden. In the Quran, Surah 2, Ayat 219, forbids drinking wine or any intoxicating drinks. And then there's also modesty in the dress. No set garments, only modesty. Now, the stereotypical robes or veils that the women wear, the purdah, P-U-R-D-A-H, the purdah, those are the robes or veils that the women wear. All right? The marriage status of women in Islam is very controversial. Muslim women appear to be highly inferior to men in status in their particular religion. Now, the Quran teaches a man can have up to 4 wives if they treat them fairly in love and marital goods. Then, in divorce, Muslim divorce is simple, and it is permitted. And in divorce, you stand in a public place and say, I divorce you 3 times. 3 times in public, and the marriage is dissolved. The 3rd time must be a 3-month waiting period to make sure that the wife is not pregnant. But I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times in public, wait 3 months to see if the wife is not pregnant, and the marriage is dissolved. All right? Moving on with Islam. We hear this word a lot on TV, and the word is jihad. What is jihad? Jihad is Islamic holy war. Islamic holy war. All right? Physical war, spiritual war. It's a battle. Jihad. Now, the principles of jihad are interesting because we're engaged in jihad as I speak around the world. Islam is. What is jihad? Number one, physical. In fact, the principles of jihad say this, but I want you to listen and understand. Physical violence may never be used to advance Islam. That's one of the principles of jihad. Number 2, Islam should only be spread by rational means and persuasion only. Number 2 principle of jihad. Number 3, if another country commits an act of aggression against an Islamic country, the Islamic country is justified to use military force to defend itself. That's principle number 3 of jihad. Principle number 4, if a non-Islamic country uses physical force to repress the free exercise of Islam or jails Muslims, this is a case of suppression and would force the Islamic nation to use force to free its oppressed Muslims. See, that's kind of makes the argument why many of the Muslims were taken to Guantanamo Bay instead of having them housed in the main land USA. Because jihad says if Muslims are jailed, other Muslims must by force and by Islamic law use force to free them. Okay? Number 5, principle of holy war. Holy war applies to any country that was once Islamic to be taken over by non-Muslim powers must be reclaimed for Islam by jihad. What is that? Well, right now on the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Islam says that land belongs to them. Judaism says that land belongs to them. So as a result, there's holy war. The Jews say, well, God gave us this land. Islam says that this land was once ours, so we must regain it by holy war or jihad. And that's why, somebody said there'll never be peace in the Middle East because of the claims on the land. All right? And King Abdullah of Jordan, President Anwar Sadat of Egypt, both compromised this principle and paid for it with their lives. All right? And thus, to the Muslim mind, any resistance to the spread of Islam is an act of oppression subject to a jihadist response. Now, I'm winding down on this area of Islam. We're coming to the United States. These last 10 minutes, we talk about the black Muslims. In 1930, Elijah Poole, who was a Detroit auto worker, met a gentleman by the name of W.D. Fard, known as Master Wali Farad Muhammad, who had taught his version of Islam as the true religion of African Americans. Now we're moving into the beginning of what we call the Black Muslim movement or the Nation of Islam in America. 1930, Elijah Poole. W.D. Fard, who was teaching Elijah Poole, W.D. Fard was teaching Elijah Poole. Fard disappeared in 1934. And the movement became known as the Lost Found Nation of Islam, or the Black Muslim movement in America. Elijah Poole became known as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. There were 6 teachings of the Nation of Islam. Number 1, that W.D. Fard was incarnation of Allah and worthy of prayer and worship. Number 2, that Elijah Muhammad is a prophet proclaiming a new message from God. Number 3, black people are descendants of a tribe known as Shabazz, the ancient inhabitants of Mecca, and the original keepers of the Kaaba, or the cube, and are by nature good, pious, and peaceful people. Number 4 teachings of the Nation of Islam, that white people are by nature evil, sneaky, and oppressive. And they are the creation of a mad scientist named Yaqub, who did not want to submit properly to Allah. Thus, white people are by nature, and white people are not fully human because they did not submit to Allah. And then number 5 teaching, black people should return to their roots of Islam, submit to the 5 pillars, take care of each other in the face of white oppression, and they should not take political action. And the 6th teaching of the Nation of Islam, by Allah's will, black people will rise again to their righteous place of dominance in the world, and white people will get what they deserve. Now, understand this. In the 1930s, black people were being lynched, oppressed, did not have the right to vote, all these different things going on, Jim Crow laws, across this country. So to hear a message that, hey, here's a religion that is a religion for black people, where at the time, Christianity, it was seen in society, a matter of American history. People would go to the Christian church, and they would leave and say, hey, we're going to have a lynching this afternoon, find a black person, have a picnic dinner, and lynch a black person. Well, when Elijah Muhammad began to teach, well, here's a separate religion for black people began to gravitate to the Nation of Islam, all right, the Black Muslim movement. Question: Black Muslim movement or Islamic mission, or a message of hope for oppressed black America? All right? It was a message of hope for oppressed black America. In the 1960s, there was a man by the name of Malcolm Little who began to be taught the message of Islam, the Black Muslim nation. Malcolm Little became known as Malcolm X. In fact, the reason he used the X, Malcolm was his given name. X was the slave owner's name. Most blacks in America, our last name came from, if you were on the Johnson plantation, your last name was Johnson. If you were on the Jackson plantation, your last name was Jackson. You're on the Washington plantation or the Jefferson plantation, that's how you got your last name. So when Muslims joined the Nation of Islam, they would X out the slave name. And so Malcolm Little became Malcolm X, and later his Islamic name or Muslim name was Malik Shabazz. In 1975, Elijah Muhammad dies, and his son, Wallace Muhammad, revived the Nation of Islam. I'm sorry, yeah, he revised or revised the Nation of Islam. One thing he did, he aligned the Nation of Islam with the mainstream Sunni Islam and its practices. Number 2, he dissolved the military arm of the Nation of Islam called the Fruit of Islam. Number 3, he changed the name from the Nation of Islam or the Black Muslims. He changed the name to the American Muslim Mission in the West, or the American Muslim Mission. All right? Number 4, he began to cooperate with Worldwide Islam, and they began to funnel Arabic oil into the United States, and they began to build mosques all across the U.S. 1975. No more black Muslims, no more Nation of Islam. Well, several years later, 1978, Louis Farrakhan revived the radical Nation of Islam, or the black Muslims. He reappropriated the racist message of W.D. Ford, and he rebuilt the Fruit of Islam military. You know, most black Muslims today in the U.S., most blacks in America are not members of the Nation of Islam or the black Muslims. They're members of the American Muslim Mission under the former Wallace Muhammad. All right? Nevertheless, the Nation of Islam is active in contemporary America even to this day. Okay? So, that gives you a brief insight. Once again, we can't go too in-depth because of our time frame, but this ends our section on Islam. Thank you.